I'd like to welcome everyone to the third session of Columbia University's MS Sustainability Management Fall Workshop Series, Workshops in Sustainability Careers and Curriculum. In this workshop series, you will hear from our alumni talk about the classes that they've taken that have helped them launch successful careers in sustainability. After tonight's panel discussion, there will be time for a Q&A with the audience. So while you're listening to our panelists, feel free to take notes, jot down any questions you have, and we'll have someone walking around with a mic later to have you ask questions for our panelists here. Now, tonight's panel is focusing on sustainability finance. It will be moderated by Bruce Kahn. Since 2012, Bruce has been an adjunct professor in the MS and Sustainability Management program. He currently teaches 3 classes: Sustainable Finance, Sustainable Agriculture, and Core Data Science Concepts for Sustainable Finance. Bruce has a PhD in Land Resources from University of Wisconsin-Madison, an MS degree in Fisheries and Allied Aquacultures from Auburn University, and a BA in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from University of Connecticut. Bruce is also Senior Portfolio Manager at Shelton Capital Management. Previously, Bruce was responsible for delivering technical advice to investors on MSCI's ESG and climate solutions tools and datasets for investment decision-making, risk management, reporting, and engagement. His previous 18 years of work experience included portfolio management and other responsibilities at firms such as Citibank, Deutsche Bank, Macquarie Global Inc., and Sustainable Insight Capital Management. This evening, joining Bruce, we're excited to have 2 in-person alumni panelists from the Sustainability Management Program: Puja Modi, Managing Director, Head of ESG EMEA at Aqua Group, and Paul Stanley, Executive Director, Commercial Real Estate Sustainable Finance at Wells Fargo, and Carolyn Eagle joining us online. She's America's Head of Sustainability Equity Indexes at FTSE Russell, and hopefully Julian Seelan will be joining us, although it's 2 a.m. Oh, he is? Hey, Julian, perfect. Let me pin.
Julian, you made it.
Yeah, let's see how this goes.
Julian is the Executive Director, Sustainability and Climate Private Assets Lead at MSCI Inc., and he's also in a different time zone. So appreciate Julian for tuning in, as well as our panelists tonight. So please welcome our panelists.
Thank you, Cindy, and thanks for organizing all these series. And you should come to every single one of them if you can, because there's so much in this program that is going to relate to what you do professionally or will do professionally. And thank you all for coming tonight, and it's a really testament to the program and your commitment to sustainability. And what we're going to talk about tonight is we have a few things that we want to cover, but I think one of the core issues that people are facing today is sustainability still a business concern? In other words, are businesses still committing to sustainability? Because if you only are following the headlines, you might think that there's not going to be a rich job world, a rich selection of jobs for a sustainability professional when you get out, and that is just not true, and that's what we're going to demonstrate tonight. You do have to keep in mind, though, that not every job is going to have the word sustainability in the title, and that's okay. Because the whole purpose of our program is to inculcate sustainability in your educations so that you bring that to any job you do, and that's really important. And hopefully, and I know these guys so well that I know that they're going to communicate this. And we have a great range of people here. So Puja graduated in 2014, 13. Paul in 2020. Carolyn, when did you graduate from SUMA?
2014.
And Julian, same, 2014?
Yep, 2014.
Right. But they're all occupying different parts of the sustainable finance world. We have another participant in the audience that will go nameless, but we're going to call on her a lot. She's does all the sustainability linked bonds, and Paul the sustainability real estate, and Puja does sustainability data, and Carolyn does sustainability indexes, and Julian does sustainability data and consulting. So we're really getting the whole gamut of the sustainable finance, and I'm in the asset management business. So we're getting the whole gamut of the sustainable finance world. So with that, I really like to ask my friends here, they just told us when they graduated, but what is it that they actually do, and how are they, whether their sustainability is in their job title or not, how is it that they bring sustainability and what they learned in the SUMA program to their day job? Like, what is your day job, and how are you inculcating sustainability into that work? And I'll start with you, Puja.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm Puja. I graduated in 2013. I've been with MSCI for about 12 years now. And so how I incorporate. So my role has been consistent, but what I do has shifted over the last 10 plus years. I started as an ESG client consultant. So I worked very closely with our institutional clients on integrating ESG data, strategy, research into their investment process and, into the firm. I think as time went on, firms were starting to integrate and have their own teams and embed it. And so now I kind of wear two hats at MSCI. I am a sustainability specialist. So really focusing on sustainability and climate and ensuring that investors understand our models, our data, our methodologies, which are still quite complex, right? If you think about how much is changing. And then my other hat is I focus on private asset investors and incorporating not just sustainability, but analytics, risk models, and everything that's kind of investment tool related firm-wide at these firms. And so where sustainability fits in is really, to me, foundational across, what each of those verticals do. So.
Great. Great, thanks. While we're on data and we still have you, Julian, why don't you tell us about what you do at ACA and the data work you work with?
Thanks, Bruce. Hey, everyone. I can't see you all, but very nice to meet you. I'm Julian. I'm a managing director at ACA Group, and maybe I'll give you a little bit of background on ACA and what we do. ACA is a compliance consulting company. We're about 2,000 people that serve the financial services ecosystem. So really every single type of financial services client, from insurance to large asset managers to small wealth managers as well. And our ESG team in particular really focuses on both advice and technology for financial services firms. My role in particular is to help clients with data related to ESG, and I really serve the private markets. So we have a variety of private equity and private credit investors that collect all sorts of ESG data to do reporting, to do analysis, to drive decisions during deal time. And we help with a variety of that analysis. I would say, Bruce, the one thing that we've really focused on is materiality and financial materiality more than anything in this environment. The world is changing and you hear a ton about this news. But all of our clients are still looking at ESG risk and opportunities in their investment process. They're just doing it in the context of financial materiality and what drives financial outcomes. And so that's really what we focus on the most.
Carolyn, both Puja and Julian referred to ESG, although I asked them about sustainability. Can you clarify what that difference in similarity is, and then how that affects your work? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
No,
but
no, that's,
I know we've
mean,
had this
it's fair.
conversation.
Of course. So the way I would characterize sustainability, and maybe this is sort of how our firm FTSE Russell does, so maybe I'm a bit biased, but I think of sustainable or sustainability as sort of an umbrella term that can encapsulate both ESG and other areas such as climate investing or climate finance, or sometimes you hear, green finance. So I do think of those as sort of distinct areas, ESG and climate. I don't know, when Julian talks about ESG data, I think it's pretty specific to environmental social governance data on public and private companies, as reported by the companies and or collected by his firm. Now, as you know, in this program, you're learning about all sorts of other kinds of data that can represent a company's sort of behavior or impact or risk or whatever it is. So I don't know if that answers the question, Bruce, but it's a fair segue, I think, into maybe what I do in my role, which is basically the management of sustainable indexes at FTSE Russell. So FTSE Russell is a large data and index and benchmarks provider. So you probably know the Russell 2000 or Russell 1000. That's sort of a common US equity benchmark. The sort of sliver of my world at FTSE Russell is managing any sort of ESG or climate index for our clients, and our clients are primarily institutional investors, asset owners, as well as asset managers. And maybe to sort of piggyback on what Puja said about the role. So I've been there about 8 years, and the one thing I'd say is that my job has gotten more complex in those 8 years. So just to give you a sense, about 300 billion in assets track a sustainable FTSE Russell benchmark. And of that, like a good chunk of those are pretty simple indexes with sort of simple rules and methodologies around, we'll start with an equity universe and screen it for companies involved with, an activity or business like tobacco or guns. It's a very sort of simple screen. The bulk of our assets are there, but the bulk of my work in the last couple of years especially have been around much more complex sort of climate aligned or climate tilted indexes, and we can sort of get into what that means, but it's sort of more interesting data on, companies' carbon emissions footprint and sort of impact and trajectory. So I'll stop there, but hope that helps give
That
some
does.
insight into that question.
Excellent, Carolyn. Thank you. Because Carolyn and I worked together for many
yes.
years, and we would
Oh yeah,
always
that
have
too.
this, we always have this debate, like, is sustainability a thing or is ESG a thing? We have all these labels for things in this field, but you have to get down to the nitty gritty details of what it is one actually does. So I'm going to turn to Paul because he's also working in this realm, but actually does something very specific. So maybe Paul, tell us about how your life actually went from complexity to more simplicity.
I'm Paul. Great to be here with you all. I'm at Wells Fargo. Many know Wells Fargo probably from the retail branch presence, but I'm in I'm in the largest growing part of Wells Fargo, our corporate investment bank. So we've got a wealth management arm, consumer lending, retail, commercial bank, and then corporate investment bank. In corporate investment bank, we've got our markets business, our banking, think Fortune 500, and then commercial real estate. And then within commercial real estate, we've got multifamily, so Fannie, Freddie agency, consumer lending. We've got a warehouse and securitization business. We've got real estate banking, and it's a massive business, like $160 billion plus balance sheet. And sustainability touches. And so my role is to focus on engaging with our real estate clients around sustainability and then finding ways to help deploy that sustainability into the financing that we do for them. I can share a bunch of different examples, but
Hold your microphone a little closer.
check. But yeah, I think it's fair to say in real estate, sustainability is really an imperative for most of our clients. They've got regulation largely at the local level, so a lot of the rhetoric at the federal level, it has an impact, but there still is a lot of local regulation. Tenants, particularly in office and other sectors, want to live in more or work in more sustainable buildings. You've got utility costs like in New York City that may go up 30% over the next couple of years. So you could call it a sustainable building, or you could call it a more efficient building that's going to pay less in utility bills. And then you've got the investor component. Morningstar put out recent fund flow numbers, and it's like 800 billion or so in sustainable focused fixed income every day. And we talk to investors that really appreciate some of the sustainability components we put around some of the financing transactions that we do for clients. So happy to dive into any of those, but sustainability very much alive in commercial real estate.
Great. One thing hopefully you've all noticed is that all four of these folks, and including our other colleague in investment banking here who does green bond lending or sustainability linked bonds, that there's a lot of jargon, a lot of language, a lot of words, right? And we were remarking earlier that when they were first students here, there's no way they had any concept of all this different language and the ecosystem and the different players. They all talk about it so naturally now, but that took years of work experience to understand and kind of bring that into their beings. And so now they're fluent in the language of sustainability and in the language of finance. And one of the points I think we really want to make on this panel is that there is this world of work out there, and there is this world of sustainability, and there is this world of work that's associated with sustainability. And this program is trying to train you guys to be able to go out there and do this work and be able to speak so fluently as all these folks have. So that's our little preamble. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. Other than my class that you all took, what was the most important class that you took in the SUMA program when you were here? And what did that bring forward for you that has been helpful throughout your career?
You should, if you try to bring the mic
Hello?
closer to your, yeah.
Okay. Okay. This was like 12 years ago, 13 years ago. This is sustainable finance is definitely one. It's funny because we actually used MSCI in your class, so I can't not remark on that. Another one that stuck with me, and I don't know, we had a long list of, like, you guys have so many more classes to pick from than I did. The life cycle class, I don't know if they still offer that. Really interesting. I don't use it day to day, but it really was critical thinking in terms of thinking through that and the cost benefit class. Really thinking about the economics of sustainability and thinking about the why, right? I think we did a case study of like Pepsi glass bottles versus plastic. And you would assume that using glass bottles is more sustainable, but then when you actually go into it and do the life cycle analysis, the water intensity and the heat needed to actually desanitize and clean this water was incredible. And so, you learn these things, and then you actually understand as a practitioner, if you were going to be working at a company or investing in a company like this, right? Financing, like, these are the things that you need to understand to actually make these decisions. And I thought those were really interesting.
Cool. Paul?
Definitely, sustainable finance was number one. And you gotta, and as Bruce always says, you gotta start with the finance first and then embed sustainability on top of it. And I think that's so true. You need to speak the language of whoever you're working with at the company and understand the fundamentals and their objectives before you can persuade them to help them understand how your objectives are aligned with their objectives and are going to make them more successful is kind of the path to success. Solar project development was very interesting. Financing the clean energy economy was very interesting, I thought. Both very technical classes that I think I don't use these exact skills in my day-to-day, but help me understand the very technical nature of what some colleagues do and help me avoid making generalizations or oversimplifying, oh, we should just do more of this or that. And I think greenhouse gas emissions, measuring and minimizing the carbon footprint as well. Like, similar theme with our clients. It's one thing to just say, why are you not on science-based target align? Like, you should just reduce, but it's really complex, and particularly in real estate where you've got triple net lease structures and tenants pay the bills. The landlord owns the property, but the tenants pay the bills. It's harder to just say, reduce emissions. You have to, again, speak the language of the landlord has to speak the language of the tenant and create incentives for, they own the building, tenant pays the bills. How can they work together to help decarbonize real estate? Those were all classes that were interesting to me, and all kind of more technical, but help make me more credible in what I do.
Now, Julian, you spent some time doing a lot of IT work. How does sustainability work into that? And then, well, what classes did you take here that helped that role when you were doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bruce. And I think probably what you meant first was that everyone should talk about sustainable finance. And actually, that was probably the most impactful class for me, just given that you talked so much about how the capital markets can be a force for good, but only if you can make the business case for it. And that's kind of a principle that I certainly apply in my day to day and all over. Um, I think the IT side, it's a fair question. I think a lot of the consulting we did was actually about helping clients make decisions through technology, right? And so, sure, Puja and Carolyn can talk about this as well. It's really about how do you consolidate all of this data that's out there in the world? How do you make sense of it? And then how do you drive decision making? And so right after SUMA, I worked at EY where we were doing a lot of MSCI implementations. And so we were actually taking MSCI data, implementing it into client systems, client processes. And that was really like a big driver of work. Now we're doing a lot of the similar stuff, but we're doing it in the private markets for private investors and in real estate as well. Um, so I wouldn't say I necessarily like took a specific class on that, Bruce, but it was really about like understanding sustainability data. Speaking the language is really important, both finance and sustainability. That becomes something that you end up using every single day. And then applying just the general skills that you learn in the program of being able to tie different pieces together, whether it's policy elements, data elements, or other sort of just decision-making analytical capabilities. Um, I feel like I use a lot of those skills in my day to day. So not necessarily IT in particular, but kind of a combination of the data and finance and sustainability that goes together.
Great. And being a nationally ranked tennis player, did you ever take the sustainability of sports class? Because we offer that now. I don't know if that was here when you were here.
Bruce, when I was there were like 9 classes, and so we all probably just had to take like the same ones.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. No, but we do have a class now on sustainability in sports, right? Yeah. Yeah. And there was a session at Climate. How many of you all went to a Climate Week event? Oh, look at that. Awesome. There was a session down at the Nest on the sustainability of the music industry, didn't it? Was anybody in that circle? You were there. Did you hear my comment?
I don't know which part of the event that was, so I haven't talked about it.
Oh, all right. They were singing the praises of certain celebrities, and
What'd you say, Bruce?
I said, well, this culture of celebrity is not sustainable,
Yes.
right? But because actually music is for everyone. Like it's only very, very recently that there's the musicians or the artists and then everyone else. Historically and evolutionarily, it's been all of us, like a village. And that is what sustainability takes, is like a village. It's not a celebrity or some big CEO. It's everybody in the entire company or everybody in the entire society. So putting celebrities on a pedestal actually, this is my opinion, is actually working against sustainability. They were talking about how they're going to get like recycled cups at MetLife Stadium. It's like, that's not much. But or like the merch is going to be organic cotton. Sure. Okay. Enough of that. Carolyn, what was your favorite class? Statistics?
Okay, I think I'll answer this in a slightly different way, which is, well, I came into SUMA not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, which I hope that resonates in the room, and it's okay. But I was that person that was like, everything looks so interesting. And I took sustainable finance and pretty quickly decided that I wanted to work in somewhere in the sort of capital markets, sustainable investing ecosystem. But at the time, as Julie had mentioned, there weren't any other classes really. And I basically at that time, I knew I needed to learn more about investments, more about the capital markets. So maybe I'm not supposed to say this on a SUMA panel, but I very quickly started taking and auditing classes in the business school, which I don't know if that's even allowed anymore. I definitely took some like not for credit thankfully, because they were so hard that I probably would have gotten a terrible grade. But I took a great class called corporate governance. That's when I sort of decided, okay, I need to like learn everything I can about ESG. I took just a sort of non-ESG finance class called factor investing, which kicked my butt, was really hard. But I think like as sort of quickly as you can focus on what you do want to learn, like you're at Columbia, just try to sort of take and learn as much about that specific thing. It's very easy in SUMA to be like, it all looks so good. And it is, it's like all really interesting, but I definitely tried to sort of focus once I knew what I wanted to do. And then my second answer is that, and this might embarrass Julian, which is great, for our capstone project, Julian and I were the co-leads or whatever you call it. And we made up a capstone. I assume capstone projects still exist. And we did exactly what we wanted to do, which we did like a meta-analysis of ESG data across 20 different vendors or something. And just selfishly, like I wanted to dig into the data and come out of it being like, well, I know all the vendors and what they do well and what they do poorly. And that helped me in my job. And so if you can, design a capstone that helps you do what you want to do professionally, then do that. Yeah. And my last sort of like what I would do in terms of what classes to take is like look at the professors and try to, they're all practitioners, right? For the most part, like take classes with people that you want to meet, and they could help you like outside of what you're going to learn in that class. So hopefully that maybe a slightly different answer than you wanted.
No, that's great. Thanks, Carolyn. We have an anonymous SUMA grad here that will not say her name or firm, but she can talk about classes. Say that.
Yeah. So my favorite class was actually outside of the SUMA program. I'll talk about that in a bit. What was memorable about the sustainable finance class for me was that I had this aha moment that helped me understand what the application of sustainability concepts in any quote unquote real job would actually entail. And it was this sort of idea of translating things that are unmeasured, intangible externalities, public goods, and really being able to fit them in the context of some private sector profit-oriented framework. And that's the thing that I took from the sustainable finance class, and then somehow it just stuck with me, and I took it to literally every class that I took over the 2 years that I was in the program. The class that was most directly relevant to the job that I landed in was actually a law school class. I think it was environmental laws and securities transactions or something like that. And I took it fundamentally because of what Carolyn just said. I wanted to understand what kind of people I wanted to work with. And I was just sort of figuring it out class by class, like throwing myself in communities that I had not been in before, and I had not been surrounded by lawyers. It was.
And now you are every day.
And now I am every day securities transactions lawyer. So, that's a total coincidence. That's not something I planned, but it was strategic on my part to sort of try to do that. I also went to an engineering class on audit, like Carolyn said. I actually took a class for grade in the actuarial sciences school. And I took a class in corporate governance in SEPA. So just sort of with that perspective of wanting to figure out who I fit with. But the securities law class was relevant because if I hadn't taken that class and then I had gone into the role that I went into in investment banking, I would have been the sustainability person who's too scared to read a financial docs package. And that class, it's not that it taught me the specific security that I was going to work on, but it just showed me that anybody can read a securities transaction package.
Can I just add something? So to what Carolyn, I think on the other side, Carolyn says kind of like, go and find a topic and go deep on it. I also think I'll play the other side of that. So yes, I agree with the professors and find the professors that you're really curious about what they're doing. I interned, I did some work with Bruce while he was at Deutsche Bank in research. I did some work in carbon markets at the time when I had no idea what carbon markets were, right? In terms of carbon credits and forestry credits and things like that. With Aaron Bloomgarden, he was just starting his asset management firm. And I still didn't know what I was doing, even when I was working with him. I was still like, okay, I'm doing this research. I still don't know what this is. I didn't know what it was until years later when it came back full circle at my job. And I was like, oh, that's what they were doing. And I think the great thing about sustainability is that it touches everything. Like there's so much of what we do that is interlinked in every day. So whether it's law, whether it's finance, whether it's policy, I think the reason why a lot of us are in it is because it's so, yes, we want to have an impact, but I also think it's day to day, something that's so ingrained in what we do, whether it's consumerism, right? What we buy, whether it's, what we want to do to save the environment, but also just business decisions or policy decisions. So I just think like, that's the great thing about where you are today. It's like, you don't necessarily need to know, like, I don't say like where you want to go, but I think be curious and try to link things together, like create the bigger picture with what you're learning. Because I think that's the,
Excellent point. Thank you.
yeah.
All right, so we sent this panel a list of the current classes, and it's pretty overwhelming. Could you guys comment on some of the classes that are now offered that you would have loved to have offered when you were in the program? Does anything come to mind that you're like, oh man, I wish I had that class when we were a student?
Private assets.
Private assets, yeah.
And I think the New York City one looks really cool. I'm curious about that because I grew up in New York City. I'd love to know more about it. Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I have a big list, but I think there are a couple classes on like leadership and influencing and different perspectives, and I think that's hugely critical in the work that I do day to day and wherever you all ultimately land. And then there was some modeling, impact finance, the value creation one. I think that's a huge growing area that I would have loved to have a crash course on as opposed to exploring it on my own.
Carolyn, I know you love decision models. Are there classes on the list today that you wish were there when you were a student?
I mean, I think to my earlier point, once I sort of, thought about like decided what I wanted to do, there weren't so many options in SUMA, and today there are. Like I just think you could, especially around sustainable finance. I think there's like 2 or 3 classes with the word ESG just in the title. And it's good to get different perspectives from different professors. Again, like look at who's teaching it, look at their background, and you'll come away with like a much more holistic view, I think. So yeah, just honestly, like any of the sustainable finance and investing classes look great.
Julian, did you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I do. I think would echo what Carolyn said. When we were there was just one sustainable finance class. And so, I have a relatively myopic view on the world. I knew I wanted to do finance. I was already working in finance. So to have more of that would have been great. I think the other area that I miss now in my career a little bit is the real assets part of the world. We collect so much data on buildings for investors, and I don't really know much about it. And I look back, and there were a whole bunch of energy efficiency classes, classes for the built environment that sort of complete the data chain in finance, so to speak. So like everything from an asset level down to a meter, whereas a lot of the ESG data will live sort of asset to an investment. So thinking about the whole spectrum would have been great back then. Now it's a little bit late, and we'll just learn on the job, I guess.
Cool. Okay. So what is missing in the curriculum now that you need in your job, or that we should add to the curriculum to better prepare ourselves for the working world in sustainability? Puja?
I would say more on asset allocation. So, how do investors allocate capital and what are the decisions that go into that? So thinking macro, but then also thinking from a strategy and asset allocation perspective. I think it's really important, at least for what I do, is to understand the decision making and what goes into that and where sustainability and climate fits into that picture. It's a variable of things. So I would say that. And then we're doing a lot with geospatial assets right now and intelligence. So that's very highly technical. So when you think about physical risk, right, to Julian's point, right, there's so much that is linked to what happens with climate change to the assets in our world, and tying that back to companies and to actual, real estate projects and then up to the vehicle that the investors are actually creating is really important. So I wish I understood kind of the more of the geospatial kind of assets and understanding kind of that, the tooling around that a little bit more. It's highly technical.
Paul, what do you think is missing today in the curriculum that you would use as a professional?
45 pages is a pretty good list, but maybe a theme across the classes, and a big focus at Wells is just fewer, more specific information. We did this big survey recently where we heard from clients that they don't want us to show up with the kitchen sink, and they want us to be very specific and pointed. What is the recommendation? What is the perspective? And what is the data that's backing it up? So our client materials are much more streamlined. Big pitch decks are 10 pages or less. And so probably more focus across the whole curriculum on specific pointed recommendations, perspectives backed up by data in a very crisp perspective. And I always botch this like Mark Twain quote, but it's like, it takes you longer to write less than it does to put a whole bunch, like, write like a whole paragraph. And I think it's totally true. And particularly in today's age where there's competing priorities and polarization, the more specific and pointed we can be, backed by data, the better off we'll be. So more a theme across all the curriculum.
Yeah, and I think what you're also pointing to is it's not really only for sustainability finance or sustainable finance. It's just skills in communication, logic, and presentation. That is, I think, a really important skill to develop while you're a student, because you get into a boardroom or an investment committee or in front of a client, you have to nail those presentations, and it's got to be crisp and logical and evidence-based. Julian, what do you think? What's missing right now?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said, Bruce. I think the soft skills are really important. And for me, a lot of it was through the capstone, where you work in a project with a bunch of your peers, you're working with a client, you're also trying to present and do all those things. So I think those are really important. I don't think there'll ever be necessarily a class directly on that. For me, the classes, I think, if we think about like the big trends in finance, there's a lot of kind of retailization of the market and trying to fundraise from wealth and retail investors. So I think classes around that, how retail might think about it differently than institutional. I think those would be really interesting. More on the private markets as well. I think great that there's a class there. But these are all areas within the financial markets that are growing really rapidly. And I think knowing more about that can only serve students pretty well.
Great. Any thoughts there, Carolyn?
I agree with all of that. So I'll just sort of take a different view, which is sort of beyond that, all the soft skills, all the presentation skills, which are so important if you are client facing, or even if you're not, because you're always selling something internally too. But my answer to this is it's amazing that even in sort of my role now, years into doing this, like how technical my job can get, especially around data. And I think everyone on this panel will agree, like just understanding big data. So like actually like how to manage and manipulate and understand big data. Also how basic modeling works, how like in my world that has to do with sort of portfolio construction and index construction, and we're basically working with financial engineers. It does get quite technical, so you'll learn that on the job, but like if you can sort of come to a workplace with just sort of really solid data skills and understanding and analytical skills, it'll really help you. So any class that has to do with that, like you will learn a skill that you can take into a workplace.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I'm actually going to talk about something specific to finance and sustainable finance. I don't think in my time there was any class talking about insurance. And I don't know that there is one now. And I think that from a forward-looking perspective, it's unfortunately a bit dark, but we need to be talking about insurance. We need to be talking about pairs of last resort. We need to be talking about risk capacity and catastrophe.
Great, okay. So I think we've covered a lot of ground, but what would be your kind of single most important kind of strategic advice to somebody who's coming out of this program and looking for a job in this job market? And I caveat that by saying, should people be looking for jobs, quote, in sustainability finance, or should they just be looking for jobs in a field like real estate or index construction or data sales, and then bringing sustainability to that? And how would you recommend people navigate that in our current political and economic environment?
Okay. I would say first look at the firm, right? What they do. Obviously the role matters, but I think, I don't necessarily think it has to be a sustainability or, climate labeled role. But if the firm is open and depending on the strategy and the goals of the firm. So MSCI was not a sustainable ESG firm when I joined it, right? That was a small piece of the business where index analytics was really the big, and it still is the kind of the most highest revenue generator. But I got a client service job there, which I was like, oh, I'll just be here for a year and move out. I'm still here for 12 years, right? But I think the thing is, you have to, I think, look at the firm, look at the people, and culture really matters. I know this is like very generic, but I think, for me, it was, do I like the people that I'm about to, kind of day in and day out work with? Do I believe in what they do? And do I believe in the leadership to actually create value in the way that I believe that is what how I want to? And I think sustainability for me was so important that I did look for that, and I ensured that was a part of the core role. But these days, right, I think whether you're an index or real estate, there are firms that are incorporating sustainability without calling it sustainability in the title, and I think there's a lot of need for your expertise. I think still there's a silo in certain firms where it's real estate or it's private assets, and then the sustainability team. I think if you can show how you bridge that gap and add value across the firm outside of just sustainability, that's kind of my biggest advice is think about sustainability as embedded across as a horizontal versus a very specific kind of sideline.
Thank you. That's excellent point. I really resonates with me. Julian, since you're sitting in the European market, what's going on over there that is either going to happen here or is not going to happen here? And should we all be moving to Europe if we want to do sustainability?
It's a good question, Bruce. I think there's a couple of things that I've noticed in my time in Europe. The first is there's been kind of a regulatory pause in what's been happening related to sustainability within finance. We had a period of regulation for investors and potentially for large companies that has really slowed down. And I think that's driving a little bit of the change in the market in the UK. We are, I think, like, I heard this actually at a panel a couple of weeks ago. The fundamental ethos of Europeans tends to be impact driven. And so it's not certainly not going away. And I think there's very much a push for sustainability among LPs or investors that's driving sustainability. So I don't think it's going anywhere. I think I have noticed that Europe tends to follow the US in many ways, more so than I thought before. Not as much of a leader, especially when you have the US start to see a pullback. I think Europe kind of followed in that regard as well. Um, I do think that there are plenty of jobs though. And to Pooja's point, like there are jobs within sustainability and sustainable finance. There are corporate sustainability jobs, probably not so many consulting jobs anymore, but there are kind of across the spectrum of sustainability, tons of jobs. So I think like whether you're in Europe or in the US, people are doing sustainability. They may not be talking about it as much to investors or publicly, just given what's going on. But certainly the work is happening across the board.
Do you concur with that, Carolyn, working for the FT Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange?
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe my perspective is a bit similar, only that my role is based in New York. I live and work in Boston, but I work very much for a global firm and a global team. In fact, my boss sits in London, and maybe my piece of advice is like, if you work for a global firm with a global footprint, and sort of even better if like your team is global, you will probably not be as subject to short-term political, sways in political like flavors of the day, right? Wherever you are. So my work has sort of ebbed and flowed between the European market and the US and Canada and Latin America, sort of depending on where there's investor interest, which is really interesting. And I think is important, like if you have a skill that you can bring to a team, maybe having like a global team will give you that sort of additional work, additional perspective. So, my advice, and I've told this to other sort of students I've spoken with. So maybe 10 years ago, I would have thought if you want to do research on companies, if you want to do ESG research on companies, you need to join an ESG firm, like a Sustainalytics, like an MSCI, like someone that like join a research team that's their job. They do research on companies, they sell it, they sell these ESG reports. Today, I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that role exists in what you'd think of as traditional firms, whether they're banks or research houses or asset managers. I do think that skill is desirable in those roles. So if it's an analyst role, if it's a researcher role, I think bringing the understanding of what is financially material to a company to that role is valuable. And that is like the sustainability lens. So I wouldn't sort of shy away from roles that maybe don't have sustainability in the title, if you think that you can add that value to it.
It's funny, when I graduated in 2015, we were saying the same thing. Oh, like, who knows how many jobs with sustainability in the title will be available, and you have to have sort of the vision for how you're going to incorporate sustainability into your role. So in a way, we've come full circle. I do think that there is plenty of opportunity for somebody who wants to lead with sustainability content, sustainability focused work processes, sustainability focused networks and connections. So if that's the question that you're asking, Bruce, plenty of opportunity. That being said, I think what we've had in the 10 years since I've graduated in the program is incredible specialization in every public and private sector industry that touches sustainability, but particularly sustainable finance. There are now, lawyers and accountants and other professionally credentialed roles or professionals who have the ability to talk in a way that is very precise and technical about sustainability, which didn't exist sort of 10 years ago. So in that sort of context, you will have to think about what you bring to the table. Either someone who's later in your career or earlier in your career, you will have value to add no matter, but you almost have to have sort of the very specific aspect of how do I fit and what do I bring that the team doesn't already have.
Well.
Yep. What was the question again? And-
Strategic advice for getting a job in the.
Yeah, I think back to there's so many factors in it. If there's a company that you really want to work for, that culture aligns with what you want to do, there may not be full-time sustainability role there. I mean, I guess outside of finance, so like we bank 120 real estate investment trusts, and the hospitality, most hotels, Marriott, Hyatt, whatever's the brand, they're owned by real estate investment trusts. There's about 12 hospitality real estate investment trusts. One has a team of 3 for sustainability. One has a team of 1. The others, it's all part of somebody's job. So if you want to work at that firm and that brand really resonates with you, you're going to have to do it as part of operations or portfolio management or legal or risk or whatever. And I think that's true in some banks as well. If you go down to the regional level, you don't want to live in a big city like New York or Boston or LA or whatever, and you want to work in finance. Sustainability will sit in some other function. There's a few banks that have teams the size of ours that just do this full time. At most other firms, it's part of debt capital markets or loan syndications or something else. So I think it's balancing company, their mission, and then, whether there is a full-time role or a part-time role, that'll be part. If the company and the culture trumps, you may have to do it part-time or as part of another function.
This was not on our agenda necessarily, but if you guys could comment on motivation, right? So what's motivating you to be a sustainability professional? And in addition to that, have we had any achievement towards satisfying that motivation? In other words, if you're motivated to become a lawyer because it's a way to make a living, or are you motivated to become a sustainability professional because you want to, save the world or make the world a better place? What's been your motivation, and are we making the world a better place with sustainability? You going for it, Puja? Good.
I mean, my motivation has always been, so I majored in economics and political economics and minored in environmental science. I was always very interested in the environment, but I always knew I wanted to marry kind of the two. To me, sustainability just was always smart. It wasn't even like I wanted to save the planet, but it just made really like sense to me. It's well, okay, we have limited resources. We don't have, unlimited water or anything. In order for businesses to thrive, we have to make the best use of them. And sustainability to me just made sense. And by the way, it actually was really, from an impact oriented standpoint, great, right? And I think I do think there's been a success, right? I know that what it feels like is that there's a entrenchment, right, in ESG or sustainability, but I actually think part of that is because we've actually achieved a lot. ESG integration, when I started 12 years ago, I remember sitting at a very large firm with 10 white men and 1 woman was the ESG person. She was basically like the token ESG person. And she was saying, and this one person on the investment team said, well, I don't want to do ESG because I don't want to have to listen to the UN, because if Syria becomes the head of UN, it made no sense. And I was like, what's happening? And that was 12 years ago at a very large investment firm. Fast forward 5 years from there, that firm has now completely integrated ESG throughout their entire investment process. And they're one of the larger, like, they don't lead with sustainability, but they've done this because it just made sense. And I think a lot of that has been, we've done a lot of our jobs, right? We have integrated ESG. So I think there's certain specialists that have to drop, but I think now it's about climate, about getting specific. There's still a lot of work to be done. So what keeps me motivated is, I think there's always going to be work. I think the models keep getting complex. We have more access to data than ever before with AI and, asset level intelligence. I think there's so much more you can do now that you wanted to do before. So second order impact, supply chain, risk management, right? Those are all things that we wanted to do that we could actually do now. So, and to other asset classes. So I think it's just more data, better data, but also just there is progress being made.
Excellent. Anybody else want to comment on motivation?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think really similar. I think the motivation, first of all, I think we've made tremendous progress. And Puja, I think you described it really well. When I started my career in this space, there were very few public markets firms that were even integrating ESG. Now, almost all public market firms in some capacity use ESG data during the decision making. I feel that way about real estate. We're getting there with private markets and securitized as well. I think the motivation for me is certainly sustainability and all of those things that align with my core values, but it feels like a space where we're always challenged to build new skills. And I think about like the work that I did 10 years ago versus what I do now. It's a totally different skill set. I think Carolyn at one point mentioned selling internally, and Paul mentioned like the presentation piece. Those things change. And like over the course of my career, there's always the next thing that's being demanded through this field. It feels like the moment you get used to something, it becomes normalized and firms are doing it, and you have to be on the frontier of the next thing and figuring out how to make the business case for the next thing. And so I think that part is really exciting, and keeps me interested in sustainability.
Motivation?
Yeah, I'll comment too. And maybe some of you have heard Bruce say this, I'm not sure, but I strongly believe in the thesis. Basically, like I think climate change is one of, our existential threats. I think most people in the room will like sort of agree generally that, climate change is one of our lifetime's biggest challenges and sort of global crises. And I think that the capital markets are one of the only forces large enough to basically deal with that. And so what excites me and motivates me, honestly, about the sustainable investment space, the capital markets, is just the scale of it. So when, we're talking about, when I work with clients that have huge, like institutional clients with huge portfolios, and even if they take 10% of their US equity portfolio and they say, we want to decarbonize this portion of our portfolio, like what excites me is like just the scale of that. So even if we're just shifting capital from, some part of the ecosystem to another, and we're, being very geeky about it, and we're applying all these sort of rules-based, and we're looking at the data and we're sort of trying to engineer this thing so it's like perfect. That's exciting. But what's really exciting is the scale. So it's a big enough thing to actually combat the thing that we're all in SUMA for, right? Like we believe that these are big challenges, so we need big solutions. And so I don't know. That's like sort of what motivates me philosophically, I guess. But yeah, to Julian's point too, and others, like I like a challenge. I like sort of the intellectual challenges of the job and the role. So.
Fantastic. Thanks. Paul?
Yeah, I like similar to what folks have said. I like the impact like personal emotional connection to the work that I do, which can also make it more exhausting sometimes. But that plus just the challenge of taking something that's, yeah, very emotionally personal and I think impactful to me and translating it for colleagues that maybe don't have that emotional attachment or purpose to the job, and making it very black and white for them so we can work with our clients to do a transaction that has a better outcome for them, um, helps the banker achieve their goals, makes more money for the firm, and also has positive environmental or social impact, and the challenge of trying to make that seamless.
Excellent. Okay, so now we're going to open it up for questions from you all. And every question needs to be predicated with like why you're in this program, what's motivating you, and then your question. But no more than 3 sentences in total. Motivation, question, maybe a third sentence about your question, but no more than 3 sentences.
Hi. My name is Aradhna, and what primarily motivates me is the learnings that I can get here to drive finance in impact and energy. So I'm more interested in those areas. But coming back to the question, and just briefly, if the panel could maybe provide us one specific example from any project that they've done recently or clients that they've worked recently, without naming names, if it's possible, that they've particularly found interesting that, could just provide us a deeper look into the job that you do.
I can start. I had to hire a GIS consultant who has a lot of satellite data to prove to a client that we weren't investing in deforestation.
I'm trying to think. So like Carolyn, our firm also creates indexes. I think, it's really great because I think combined, we probably have, allocation to like hundreds of billions of dollars to climate indexes. So I think that's really innovative. Some of the more recent private markets, innovations that we've done is we've built tools to allow private asset investors to actually with the lack of data. So you all know private assets, there's not a lot of data out there, to obtain more data and then also to proxy and estimate data where there's lack of actual disclosures. And so what that allows a private asset investor to do is understand risk better, and also to market their funds and fundraise against other public funds, right? So right now you have to understand private funds are against public funds. So the whole game here is how do you help private asset investors get those allocations, but then at the same time, help them understand that the sustainability transparency is something that's needed for it. So we're kind of driving some of that at scale. So we've built disclosure tools. We've also built asset intelligence tools to help, and again, this is not just sustainability ring fence. This is large scales of private credit teams utilizing asset intelligent models to underwrite these deals, right? So that to me is really important because it's no longer an ESG team begging their investment teams to do something. It's the investment teams now seeing the value of certain climate and sustainability tools and creating value in their own deals at the end of the day.
Have been down globally in the US this year, but the securitization market has been pretty hot. And that's an area where we've been leaning in from a commercial real estate perspective. And it's rewarding for us when we put in extra effort with a client to not just say this building is LEED gold, so it's a green bond, but this little building is LEED gold. It's X% more efficient than ASHRAE 2019 baseline, which actually means something versus just saying it's more efficient than your typical building, looking at the embodied carbon, looking at the water reduction, really granular metrics. And then to hear from an investor that their entire order went into their green and impact funds is cool. Again, it's good for the client. It's good for the investor. It's good for my deal team because it's as much about managing internal relationships and expectations, because bankers on board helps lead to clients on board. That's a recent example, and we've led 10 of those year to date, which has been pretty cool.
Next question. Sir.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. This is my last semester, so this is a dream panel. Thank you. My name is Shiva, and my motivation is frankly that the more people from this side come to that side, we can make more impact and more sustainable investments. So to answer Caroline, the business schools policies are the same. The classes are still pretty stingy, but the problem being that their offerings have changed and they have a lot of sustainability based classes now. So SUMA used to be this connect between sustainability and finance, and that's what some of us here hope to do, to navigate from sustainability to finance. But now, since business school, there's a lot of impact and sustainability based classes who come with like private equity, investment banking, experience. How to navigate this predicament where there are really experienced professionals who also come with that background, and we are someone who are just starting out in our career and want to break into that area, but SUMA is our only pedigree.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think it can be, look, I think any field, right, that you go into, there will always be people who are more experienced than you. I would say, I don't know how specific this is to SUMA, but I do think SUMA, and look, I know, I think all of the panelists, I think we just met today, which is surprising, but, I think we all have met each other throughout our walks in the last, 10 years of careers. I can tell you one thing, like we were all in different places learning and still not sure that we're quite there. I still don't know if we are, and I think it's because we're keep learning. Like, I think the thing is, the soft skills, the learning, the ambition, that is something, and if you bring it to the right firm, I think is highly valuable. And yes, there'll be people who are more experienced, but at least I know in my firm, where you're willing to learn and you're willing to put in the time is really critical. And I do think that the skills that SUMA gives you, I mean, again, looking at this course list, you bring a lot of perspective, right? Going back to my comment on carbon markets, like I didn't know what carbon markets were. And then I remembered, oh, I did take that class. And if I can try to link and tell the bigger picture, I think there's always going to be specialists, but if you can try to link what the story is and tell the bigger picture of what you learned at SUMA and bring that to these firms, I think that it's highly valuable. And I do think that there's a perspective you bring that maybe the Columbia Business School, even though they have a couple of sustainability classes, doesn't necessarily bring. You can learn the finance, right? You can learn the finance, and I have learned the finance. So it comes.
Sorry. I think the important thing is to understand that you're not going to out-lawyer the lawyer, or outcompete the accountant at being an accountant. So the more important thing is to understand what is the role really requiring. And there's lots of roles which may say, oh, whatever JD preferred, but they don't actually need a lawyer, and you might be a better fit for it. So I think that's one thing. The second thing I think is there has to be a reason for an employer, a potential employer, to actually take a chance on a generalist versus a specialist. And that's, again, the ball's in your court to make the case for that, because it's entirely dependent on how you define your skill set, how the employer's looking at the role. And there is so much scope for serendipity. In fact, I somehow think for some reason serendipity is more important in sustainability than other professions. But so it's almost like don't bemoan the tragedy of what you don't have. Like, focus on what you have.
Good point. Julian, Carolyn?
I love that answer so much that I can't top it.
Excellent. All right, next question. Yes, ma'am. Oh, she had her hand, but we'll get to you in a sec. Go ahead.
What motivates me is the built environment. I think it's the oldest, largest asset class, and it is one of the biggest opportunities of our generation, in my opinion. My question is kind of two-part. One, you guys sit at the top of sort of your game right now. How are you kind of redefining the scope of your roles and bringing organizations along that path, various stakeholders, including incorporating social equity? And then obviously the rise of AI, is a double-edged sword, one that I'm kind of bullish on. How are you leveraging that in your day-to-day roles to expedite, enhance your capability, expand your capability? Thanks.
There are two very big questions. Julian,
I'm
you want
happy to
take that?
go on AI. Yeah, certainly. So we have a technology product that basically collates data from the public domain as well as internal databases that client have, as well as media sources, right? And so we use AI to basically help make sense of that data. There are large data sets that get processed through our technology. But the fact is, at least like with our LLM, that the AI is not perfect. It's about 60 to 70% accurate in reading a sustainability report, for example. And so there's still a lot of work to do around training those models and making sure that they're correct. We also live in a world where there's so much unstructured data and contextual data that's required to make decisions that AI still isn't quite there. Certainly, like a lot of our competitors use it all the time and tout their use of it quite a bit. And then as far as like on top of my game, I really kind of probably feel a bit of imposter syndrome all the time. I don't know that I'm ever on top of my game in this space. But what Carolyn said earlier is really important, where you are always selling something, whether you're selling your skill set or your ability to drive value or the ability to drive change at an organization or for your clients. And I think it's really important to have that mindset of like, there's a world of people to convince that this is valuable, both internally and externally. And I think that kind of is a perspective that I feel like I have to bring all the time. Not only are there sales targets to hit, but there's also like people to convince on the business case, right, that we always go back to. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful.
So basically, my motivation is embedded in the question. Many companies don't yet consider biodiversity as financially material to their business. And how do you approach this challenge if you do? And what are your thoughts on making biodiversity a core consideration in corporate or financial decision making?
Carolyn, do you guys have biodiversity indexes?
I sort of heard that. Was Bruce asking if we have biodiversity
Biodiversity
indexes?
indexes, yes.
The short answer is not yet. The longer answer is that it's a really hot topic right now. If you are interested in biodiversity, please like go deep on it and know that investors are asking about it. Researchers are looking into it. Data providers are trying to figure out different ways to, I mean, some are already doing this, but others are trying to, now figure out how to best reflect both biodiversity risks and opportunities. So yes, if you're going to focus, that's a great area. I think it's super interesting, and I do see it coming up a lot more in the sort of sustainable investment circles. We have some tools, like I mentioned, to sort of look at how, a company both is exposed to biodiversity risk, but also potentially like can generate revenue based on some biodiversity component. But how that's being translated into investments, I think, is still being worked out, right? Like how it's being translated into public
Carolyn,
and
but
private
I think we're
market
ending
assets.
on. Try again.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you guys got that last part, but
about real estate, biodiversity?
It's very important in real estate. And again, like hospitality, probably the most. One of our clients spends 6% of their capital budget every year on climate risk, resiliency, natural habitat protectation, and I'm sure I know others do a little bit less explicitly than this industry leader. And then around like the financial materiality, hopefully appraisals start to factor a lot of the sustainability work even more explicitly down the road. I think there's a way to go, but particularly in sectors like office, where you look at where folks are investing in sustainability and where folks aren't, and you can charge higher rents, you can pay lower utility costs, you can avoid local law 97 and building performance standards that positively affects your NOI and your financials. So is definitely financially material. And there, and there's an opportunity for some of the work to become even more explicit in some of the other asset classes.
Did you want to say something? Yes.
I agree with Carolyn. I think it's a really important field. I do think this is where there's better data coming out with assets. So how do you link, and Bruce is probably the best to think about agriculture, right? I think a lot of companies are exposed to biodiversity risks without actually understanding what biodiversity risks entail. And I think unlocking a lot of the data that's linked to physical risks, to assets that tie into supply chain is going to make this a lot more evident. And so, we're working on ways we have biodiversity risk. We are in the works of building a biodiversity index, so embedding it within our index suite. It's really tricky because of the science behind it. So I would encourage you to look at some thought leaders in this space. If you're thinking about investing, there's Sarah Kapnick from JP Morgan. She puts out a really great, and I think, on agriculture and biodiversity. So I don't think we've quite figured it out in terms of how to tackle and pinpoint the specific risks in order to tackle it across sectors. I think there's concentrations of it that are known, but I think across the sector and downstream and upstream impacts is what is the hardest area. So yeah.
I think Pooja's being too polite, and she wants to tell you that biodiversity is actually not material for many corporates. And the most important thing to understand is what aspect of nature or biodiversity risks actually matter. And part of it is, I think, relevant to, sorry, Puja. But part of it is actually this idea that in anything in sustainability, you have to start with the thing that's actually closest to the end audience that you're talking about. So if the thing that's closest to the end audience is not biodiversity, but it's purely the extraction of the blood of the horseshoe crab for a pharmaceutical company, right? Or it's purely the certain types of coffee strains that may survive in certain weather patterns, then that's what you should be talking about, not biodiversity, right? Because that's not about biodiversity. That's a species, location, supply chain specific impact.
Great, thank you. Let's give this panel a round of applause. Fantastic.